SmackDown wasn't always the land of opportunity. Long before it stood shoulder to shoulder with Raw, it started as a daring experiment, a gamble to bring WWE's chaos to network television. The year was 1999. The wrestling world was on fire, ratings were booming, and the Monday Night Wars had fans glued to their screen. WCW had Nitro, WWE had Raw, and Vince McMahon had a vision. He wanted to take the Attitude Era's blockbuster energy to primetime that was free, unfiltered, and unstoppable. But why Thursday? Why risk it when Raw already ruled cable? The answer was simple: ambition. With icons like The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Triple H driving pop culture, WWE wasn't satisfied with owning Monday. They wanted to dominate the entire week. SmackDown was born out of rivalry, star power, and one man's magnetic charisma, and it quickly became more than just another show on UPN. It proved that WWE could outshine and out-entertain anyone, anywhere, on any night of the week. Now, let's dive into how this entire phenomenon began, starting with the very first ever SmackDown. 1999, wrestling's war at its peak. By early 1999, wrestling was everywhere. The world of professional wrestling had exploded into the mainstream. You couldn't flip channels, walk into a school hallway, or pass by a mall kiosk without hearing someone shout, "Austin 316," or "If you smell what The Rock is cooking." It was the height of what fans now call the Attitude Era, that was loud, unpredictable, and utterly magnetic. The infamous Monday Night Wars was behind all that chaos. Since 1995, WWE's Raw is War and WCW's Monday Nitro had been competing every week, battling for cable supremacy. It was basically a creative war, and every Monday felt like a war zone. WCW had poached Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall, launching the rebellious NWO that dominated pop culture for years. Meanwhile, WWE, once seen as the underdog, clawed its way back with some of the most iconic storytelling ever seen in wrestling. The Montreal Screwjob, the birth of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and the rise of a young, charismatic superstar named The Rock. By early 1999, the tide had turned. Raw had overtaken Nitro in the ratings, and WCW's golden run was starting to crumble under the weight of questionable creative choices and backstage turmoil. But just as WWE regained control of Mondays, something bigger was brewing. WCW tried to extend its dominance with Thunder, a Thursday night show that promised more action but struggled to capture the same spark as Nitro. That's when Vince McMahon, ever the opportunist, saw his chance. Wrestling had already taken over cable, and now he wanted to bring it to network TV. Enter UPN, the United Paramount Network, a young broadcast channel trying to make its mark among the giants of network TV. At the time, UPN was searching for a hit, something bold, loud, and culturally relevant to grab viewers' attention. WWE, meanwhile, had what UPN needed: massive popularity, loyal fans, and characters who were practically household names. The timing couldn't have been better. For WWE, the deal was more than a business move. It was validation. Wrestling, once seen as lowbrow entertainment, was heading to primetime network TV. No pay-per-view fees or cable needed. Just Thursday nights for everyone to watch. Fans could now see The Rock, Austin, Triple H, and The Undertaker on a bigger stage, while WWE moved from cable success to a full mainstream takeover. Behind the scenes, WWE's goals were clear: to reach a bigger audience by showcasing its top stars beyond cable, to see if the wild Attitude Era style could work on stricter network TV, and to beat WCW by airing SmackDown on Thursdays against Thunder. It was classic McMahon. Smart business mixed with showmanship. When SmackDown debuted with its pilot on April 29, 1999, the energy was electric. The set was new, the colors were blue, and the atmosphere, even through the screen, felt different. The pilot's success spoke volumes, and by August 1999, SmackDown became a weekly fixture on UPN. Within weeks, it was the network's top-rated show, drawing around 6.5 million viewers, almost rivaling Raw itself. For a new program on a fledgling network, that was huge. Even WCW noticed. Feeling the pressure, they moved Thunder to Wednesdays to avoid the onslaught. For fans who lived through that time, it felt like watching history unfold. Suddenly, wrestling wasn't confined to late-night cable. It was front and center in primetime. Parents who never cared about wrestling were now catching glimpses of The Rock cutting promos on Thursday nights. Teenagers wore SmackDown shirts to school. It was a movement. The birth of SmackDown was more than another WWE milestone. It marked wrestling's full crossover into mainstream pop culture. What began as a bold experiment soon became a cornerstone of WWE's legacy, proving in 1999 that the company wasn't just fighting for ratings, but building an empire. Behind the curtain, building the blue brand. When WWE decided to launch SmackDown in 1999, they were doing more than just adding a new show to their weekly lineup. They were crafting an entirely new identity, almost like building a second flagship from the ground up. Behind that bold move was a powerhouse team that shaped the look, feel, and spirit of what would eventually become the blue brand we grew up watching. At the top, of course, was Vince McMahon, the ever-present visionary, part promoter, part general, and part mad scientist. Vince was executive producer, involved in everything from the show's tone to how each segment flowed. Supporting him was Kevin Dunn, the man responsible for WWE's signature visual style during the Attitude Era. If Raw felt gritty and in-your-face, SmackDown would feel sleeker, brighter, and more futuristic, and that came directly from Dunn's production instinct. Alongside them were two creative forces fans may not see on camera, but absolutely felt in the product: Bruce Pritchard and Brian Gewirtz. Pritchard, a longtime lieutenant in McMahon's inner circle, had a hand in talent direction and big-picture storytelling. Gewirtz, who would go on to become one of WWE's longest-serving head writers, brought structure, humor, and personality to the scripts, especially important for a network audience that expected sharp, polished storytelling. Together, this team worked like an engine, building a framework for what SmackDown should sound and feel like. Why SmackDown, though? If you lived through the Attitude Era, you didn't need to ask. By late 1998, The Rock's catchphrase, "layeth the smacketh down," was everywhere. It had jumped from promos to t-shirts, from talk show interviews to casual conversation. It was one of those lines that transcended wrestling entirely. It became such a cultural staple that years later, SmackDown literally entered the dictionary. The potential was immediately apparent to Vince McMahon. If anarchy and rebellion were the foundation of Raw, then SmackDown, named after a quote from one of the world's biggest stars, would naturally be fun, quick, thrilling, and accessible to even the most casual viewers. Let's face it, referring to it as SmackDown gave the impression that it belonged to The Rock. From the beginning, McMahon wanted SmackDown to be more than a second Raw. Instead, it would be Raw's flashier, more streamlined sibling, the same Attitude Era edge, but with more in-ring action and tighter storytelling to fit network TV conventions. Creative meetings at the time were filled with debates about tone, pacing, and talent rotation. Gewirtz tended to champion character-driven stories, while Pritchard focused on balancing big stars with rising talent. Together, they built a writing approach that captured the spectacle of the era without overwhelming a network audience that wasn't used to wrestling's cable-level insanity. The pilot episode, taped April 27, 1999, loaded with top stars and dramatic moments, set the tone. Then came the official debut on August 26, 1999, taped at Kansas City's Kemper Arena. What immediately separated SmackDown from Raw was the look. Everything was blue. The ropes, the lighting, the graphic. Whereas Raw was fiery red and industrial, SmackDown leaned into a sharp, metallic, almost sci-fi presentation. The centerpiece was the Ovaltron, a rounded entrance screen that looked nothing like Raw's Titantron. It gave SmackDown a futuristic aesthetic that fits perfectly with late 1960s style. Kevin Dunn's production team doubled down on dramatic lighting, wider camera sweeps, and cleaner transitions to give the show a network-ready polish. Even the marketing leaned heavily on The Rock with promos, opening monologues, and ad campaigns built around his energy. Fans knew immediately that this was The Rock's show. Behind the curtain, SmackDown was the product of dozens of minds working in sync. McMahon charted the course. Dunn sculpted the look. Pritchard and Gewirtz crafted stories. Producers and agents fine-tuned matches. The stars from The Rock and Triple H to the newer wrestlers made the show come alive every Thursday night. The first SmackDown. Before SmackDown became the blue brand we had come to know, it first arrived as a test run, a single pilot on UPN. The show was taped at the New Haven Coliseum in Connecticut, and even as a one-off, WWE stacked the deck with some of the biggest stars imaginable, because if they were going to convince network TV they were worth millions of eyeballs, they needed to bring out the heavy artillery. The main event alone felt like a time capsule of Attitude Era power. The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Triple H and The Undertaker. That's basically a Mount Rushmore of 90s wrestling sharing one ring. The match was pure Attitude Era chaos with brawls on the outside, trash talk, interference, and the crowd reacting to every step like they were witnessing history. Deep in his heel authority phase, Shane McMahon introduced his signature style of excessive meddling, which would soon become ingrained in SmackDown's character. The official creation of the corporate ministry, which resulted from Shane McMahon's faction merging with The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness, was a significant story concealed within this pilot. It was one of those holy crap, everything is merging moments that characterized late 1970s WWE for home viewers. Although no one realized it at the time, this combination of narrative-heavy segment, high-profile matches would eventually serve as the model for SmackDown's character. 4 months after the pilot ran, SmackDown officially premiered as a weekly series, and WWE WWE chose a venue loaded with emotional weight, Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri, the same building where Owen Hart had tragically passed away earlier that year. Returning there was a quiet statement of resilience, a sign that the company and its performers were pushing forward while carrying the memory of a fallen brother. The night's main event embraced everything fans loved about the era. Triple H versus The Rock for the WWF Championship, with Shawn Michaels as special guest referee. It was classic Attitude Era storytelling. Michaels stirring controversy just by existing, Triple H playing the egotistical new champion, and The Rock generating crowd reactions so loud you could feel them through the TV. At one point, Shane McMahon tried to appoint himself a second referee, because of course he did, which naturally led to tempers flaring and everyone piling into another ringside brawl full of egos and chaos. The undercard was just as strong, featuring a tag team championship triple threat, a hardcore title match, and appearances from Kane, Edge, Jericho, and other rising favorites. The show also had personality thanks to a running gag with Howard Finkel, who tried to reinvent himself, entering to the Ultimate Warriors theme, grabbing the mic, getting tackled, and ending up in quick skits with Jericho and Ken Shamrock throughout the night. With Triple H and Chyna opening the show, it was clear SmackDown wasn't going to sit behind Raw for long. If WWE needed proof that SmackDown could thrive on network TV, the fans delivered immediately. From the pilot to the debut, the crowd reactions were electric, and on top of that, the production was big, bold, and blue. A few years later, in 2007, SmackDown officially landed in the Oxford English Dictionary, a reminder of just how deeply the show and The Rock's vocabulary had seeped into pop culture. SmackDown would remain taped for most of its life until eventually going fully live in 2016. However, those first episodes, the pilot and the official premiere, set the tone for everything to come. They balanced storytelling, athleticism, drama, and star power in a way that made SmackDown instantly feel like must-see TV. WWE had gambled by stepping into the world of network broadcasting, and within one night, it was clear that the gamble had paid off.
Building in disgust. Oh, my!
The aftermath and legacy of the first SmackDown. Originally, SmackDown was introduced as the broadcast counterpart to Monday Night Raw, a way to extend the Attitude Era's momentum beyond cable. But very quickly, it proved it wasn't just an accessory. The show developed its own rhythm, a little cleaner than Raw, but still rebellious. A different kind of energy, but equally addictive. Its presence on UPN meant it was reaching living rooms that didn't even have cable, and that reach transformed casual channel flippers into weekly loyalists. SmackDown became must-see television not because it copied Raw, but because it evolved into something distinct. Ask any longtime fan about SmackDown's golden years, and you'll hear the same phrase again and again, the SmackDown Six. In the early 2000s, six performers, Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Edge, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, and Chavo Guerrero, practically reinvented what weekly wrestling could be. Their matches had athleticism, emotion, pacing, and storytelling in a way that felt groundbreaking for network TV. According to retrospective reports and fan discussions, this era didn't just elevate SmackDown, it convinced people that SmackDown was the wrestling show of the week. The early success of SmackDown also had strategic consequences. WCW's Thunder was already slipping, and SmackDown's ratings on UPN, consistently among the network's highest, only widened the gap. WWE suddenly had a broadcast hit on Thursdays, then Fridays, and each move helped strengthen its foothold in mainstream entertainment. The show became a key pillar of WWE's expansion, supporting live events, merchandise, and international distribution. SmackDown actively built WWE's dominance. In 2002, WWE made one of its biggest structural decisions: the brand split. SmackDown gained its own exclusive roster, its own championships, and its own creative voice. And with that came a new wave of stars. Brock Lesnar became the face of the blue brand, steamrolling his way into history. John Cena found his footing on SmackDown before rising to icon status. Eddie Guerrero reached the pinnacle of his career here, ultimately winning the WWE Championship. SmackDown wasn't the other show anymore. It was a proving ground and a launchpad. Over the years, SmackDown has bounced across networks from UPN to the CW, to My Network TV, to Sci-Fi, to USA Network, and eventually to Fox in 2019. These changes weren't signs of instability, but of value as broadcasters kept wanting a piece of the blue brand. Even decades after its debut, SmackDown often matched or beat Raw in viewership, showing that its identity had become just as essential to WWE's weekly storytelling. Even in the 2020s, SmackDown kept evolving. WWE announced a major 5-year, $1.4 billion deal to move SmackDown back to USA Network in 2024. The show later expanded temporarily to 3 hours in early 2025, and in a historic shift, joined Netflix internationally beginning January 2025. For one episode, SmackDown even streamed worldwide on YouTube before the full move to Netflix. By mid-2025, the show returned to its classic 2-hour format, continuing to adjust to audience needs while reaching more global viewers than ever before. A key part of SmackDown's history is its shifting broadcast day. The show began on Thursday nights in 1999, moved to Fridays in 2005, returned to Thursdays in 2015, switched to Tuesdays in 2016, and finally settled into its modern era of Friday nights in 2019, where it continues to thrive. Despite all these shifts, its appeal never faded, and each move marked a new chapter in its evolution. Looking back, it's incredible how much began with that first SmackDown taping. What started as a network experiment grew into a cornerstone of WWE's identity, a place where legends were made, where wrestling evolved, and where fans found a weekly home. For anyone who grew up during the Attitude Era, SmackDown was more than TV. It was part of the week. It's amazing how it all began the night The Rock stepped on UPN and changed the trajectory of WWE with one simple promise: to lay the SmackDown. Marvelous verdict. So, looking back at that debut, it's clear SmackDown was meant to be more than just weekly TV. The very first episode announced that WWE wasn't confined to cable anymore, and it had stepped onto primetime with The Rock's confidence and McMahon's ambition. Born from a catchphrase, SmackDown reinvented weekly wrestling by being louder, brighter, faster, and unapologetically larger than life. It captured the energy of the Attitude Era while promising something new, proving that wrestling could thrive on network TV without losing its edge. And over the years, SmackDown has delivered by outlasting rivals, jumping networks, creating icons, and giving us everything from Brock Lesnar's rise to Roman Reigns' era-defining dominance. Yet it all goes back to that wild first night. A new ring, a loud crowd, and The Rock setting the stage with pure electricity. What's your favorite SmackDown moment? Drop it in the comments, and if you can still smell what The Rock was cooking in '99, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.